Okay, so there we go. So hello everybody. So we are Out of Bounds Theatre. I'm David. You've got Jake, and here with us today we've got Deryck Newland from Theatre Royal Winchester.
Hello.
And yeah, we were going to be asking him some questions and getting to know a little bit about how he's feeling and Theatre Royal Winchester and everything that's been going on with the lockdown and the donation appeal. In the last legs of our crowdfunding page that we've been doing, because we'll be finishing that at the end of the month. And yeah, then we'll be passing it all over to Deryck Theatre Royal Winchester in hopes to help as best we can. So first of all, Deryck, do you want to explain a little bit about the donation appeal, the survival appeal, and Theatre Royal Winchester?
Yeah, no, thanks, folks. And you know, it's wonderful that local companies and emerging artists are rallying round. You know, really it should be the other way around, actually. You know, as an established arts organisation, we should be supporting you. But you know, it feels really powerful that young artists and young creatives are getting behind their theatre in this moment. You know, and it will be our job to make sure we repay you by finding you work, you know, in the future. But as people will know, particularly successful building-based theatres are supremely challenged as a result of COVID-19. And I say successful ones are more challenged because the more you're earning your own revenues by driving sales through your building, the more the cliff edge has come in terms of the revenues you no longer have as a result of lockdown. You know, and that applies to venues like us who are now earning 80% of our turnover entirely through our earned income and our trading. For the Mayflower down the road in Southampton, of course, it's even more challenging because I think they earn something like 95% of their revenue as a commercial theatre through their box office and trading. So it's really tough for theatres. Of course, we're not the only sector that is really affected, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that. You know, we're not a special case. You know, you look at the travel industry, tourism, you look at retail, hospitality, it's really hit everybody hard. I guess theatres are specifically challenged because the whole business model is about a lot of people in a crowded room for an extended period of time. And that really doesn't mix with a pandemic. So we have to acknowledge that we're going to be the last part of the economy to reopen for that reason. So it became very apparent to our trustees, because we're a charity, we're called Play to the Crowd as a charity, and Theatre Royal Winchester is one of the things we run. We also operate Hat Fair, of course, the wonderful outdoor arts festival that explodes in joy every first weekend of July in Winchester. And I know you guys have been involved in the past with Hat Fair too. And then we run all of our outreach and engagement work as well, which often goes below the radar. So all of those things has had to stop. Our trustees of the charity have been looking very carefully at our numbers, at our financials. And the reality is, despite the best efforts of government so far with the furlough scheme, we are still hemorrhaging money because we have to look after the building and we still have to pay ongoing costs. So it became apparent to us that in order to survive through this very difficult period, we're going to need quite a big sum of money to get us through. And that sum was established at £225,000, which is a big sum. And that will ensure that we can continue beyond September with a restructured business model, with some difficult decisions as part of that, including potential redundancies. So some of the team will have to go because we don't envisage being able to trade in the way that we used to for at least 18 months and possibly never. You know, going back to the way things were is possibly, one, not a good idea anyway, but two, probably impossible because people's behaviours will have changed fundamentally. So we're having to sort of restructure the business model, and to bridge us across to the new business model and all the costs involved in getting to there, that's the sum that we need. So we launched our survival appeal on the 3rd of July, which was what would have been the first day of Hat Fair, of course. So it was a really powerful moment to launch it. And within 3 days, the crowdfunder got to 50 grand. It's now just hit today 80 grand. And we believe we have something approaching that offline as well through other means. So incredibly, by the end of the first month, we think we're 2/3 of the way towards that target, which is, really exciting. Of course, people who understand fundraising knows that it's a U shape. You get all the energy at the beginning, then it'll go quiet, and then you'll get some energy at the end as people realize the urgency again. So we're in the bottom of our U shape probably at this stage, but we're already 2/3 of the way there. So it's very exciting. It does feel what set out at the beginning of July as a target that we were all going, blimey, this is going to be tough. We're now thinking we can do this. This is possible. And it's through people like you who are contributing that is making that possible. And there's real power in the crowd. And that's why we renamed the charity in the autumn, Play to the Crowd, because we are only as good as the people we serve, and we should be serving everybody. And my God, after this, we're going to need to serve everybody because they are saving us at the moment. So that's where we are, folks. Oh, by the way, I'll say it now in case I forget at the end, crowdfunder.co.uk/play to the crowd.
Nice little plug in there. We'll definitely chuck it in the description as well, any of the relevant links and stuff, so that people can go straight to it. So just after that, the first thing that came to my mind was, so for anyone who doesn't know, can you explain to them a little bit about your role in the charity and Theatre Royal Winchester, and what that kind of means? Because I feel like some people will see like the CEO of this charity or something, and then have no idea what that then entails and what the roles and responsibilities are. People may have seen your videos recently of you going around the Theatre Royal Winchester and doing the odd jobs because other people obviously had to be furloughed and things like that. But what does your role entail?
I always love that question. What the hell is a CEO? And I always go, yeah, actually, that's a good point. So the chief exec of any organization is ultimately responsible for delivering the vision and ensuring it's financially sustainable and secure, and also responsible for enabling everybody else in the organization to do their jobs effectively. So in some senses, I'm an enabler, I guess. That's the way I would see the role of a chief exec, especially in an arts charity. My job is to try to make other jobs more doable. But because we're not a massive entity, I'm also responsible for all of the programming at the Theatre Royal Winchester. So I make all of those decisions. I choose the program. I do the deals with the visiting companies, which is part of the job that I really enjoy, actually, because it's still talking to artists, and that's the bit that sometimes, as a boss stuck in spreadsheets all the time, you sort of miss a bit. So yeah, in a nutshell, my job is to take responsibility, to set the vision, and to try to communicate that vision in a powerful, compelling way, to enable everyone else to do their jobs. And then my sort of task-related jobs are really around the finances and the program. Yeah. So that's what a chief exec does in an arts organisation.
In very few words and not enough time to go any further into it, obviously. But great.
That's a brief overview. That's fantastic. So something else we've been wondering was how you personally have been finding lockdown, because of course the theatre industry and the business side of things has been very difficult across the board for everyone. But on a sort of personal note, I think we've all been going just a little bit out of our minds with the current circumstances, and we were wondering how you've been finding it all.
Oh, thank you for caring. Well, I mean, it was very interesting back on March the 15th, I think it was, at about 5 o'clock in the evening. I was in the theatre, and Mark Bruce Dance Company, one of my favourite dance companies, were doing their get-in prior to performing on the Tuesday and the Wednesday. And I'll never forget seeing on the news Boris, bless him, saying that he no longer advised anybody in the public to go to theatres, which of course was a kind of a nonsense thing to say, actually, because it effectively, he should have just closed us, but basically didn't do that for another week. So he left it up to us, people like me, chief execs of theatres, to make that decision. So of course, we immediately said, this is unsustainable. We have to close now. We have to make that decision that he is not prepared to make yet. So we did. We made the decision at 5 o'clock. UK Theatre and SALT, the Society of London Theatres, we're a member of UK Theatre, within sort of 10 minutes had then come on board and said, yes, absolutely, all theatres should now close. So we were sort of about 10 minutes ahead of the curve on that one. And then I had to go on stage, and the dancers were warming up before doing a technical rehearsal. And I had to say, it's over, folks. It's gone. And they had no idea, because they'd been in the theatre all day. And the shock, the palpable shock on those artists' faces was scary. And since then, it's been a roller coaster, because, of course, within 2 weeks, almost everybody else was furloughed. We moved quite quickly once that was possible, because we knew immediately that financially it was going to be incredibly difficult. And then I haven't had a day off since, literally. The amount of financial scenarios and the challenges around sort of deciding how to go forward have been quite stressful. But I think the hardest thing is the people thing, because we've now had to go through a consultation period around redundancies. That is all coming to a decision next Monday, in fact. And these are people I work with. These are people I care about. You'll know what it's like when you work in an arts organisation. It's like a second family. It really, honestly, I'm not being facetious about it. And having to be the one who makes the decision, if you like, about restructuring, and therefore whose roles might no longer exist, I found that personally really difficult. I've always said I'm too soft to run an organisation, to run a business. Ultimately I'm a practitioner, really, and so I'm finding that responsibility, very hard. And you can see I'm going grey, or even greyer. I've got the wrinkles. But it just has to be done, and it has to be done now, because once the furlough ends, and people on 3-month notice periods, so in fact, the end of July is the start of a 3-month notice period to the end of October, we will not be able to bring those people back without going bust. So that's the rationale. So I found it really difficult personally to answer your question. Running is my sort of stress buster. So I try and keep going running, just to get out and about. And I I guess the comfort is that we're not doing this in isolation. We're not the only organisation having to do these things. It's happening all around us, and it's carnage in so many ways. So this has been the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my career. And that's a career of the best part of 35 years now. So I hope I don't have to go through this again, I tell you.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine. I think that's it. There's been that lovely sense of solidarity and continued effort and drive for people who are working within the arts and supporting the arts and that. And it is nice to know that you're not, like, individually the only person, like any of us. It's not just us that it's happening to, but that doesn't make it any more better that it's still the situation that we're in. We still have to deal with it. We still have to do the thing. So yeah, like it at least
love company at the end of the day. Yeah. At the very least, we're all in this together and in our own sort of sense. Yeah.
Following that, I was going to ask, because you were explaining earlier about the different aspects of Play to the Crowd, so Theatre Royal Winchester, Hat Fair, and then can you tell us a little bit more about Playmakers? Even you said it sometimes goes under the radar a little bit, and so out of that, for anyone who doesn't know, because I'm pretty sure they'll know, especially local audience members, they definitely know about Theatre Royal Winchester and Hat Fair. what is Playmakers and why is it so important to the local community?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, just to take a step back first, one of the reasons we rebranded the charity in the autumn, and I'm so glad we did actually now, because at least we now have a brand we feel proud of that we can use as a platform to try to ensure we survive. But one of the reasons we did it was that actually, although you're right, people did know about Theatre Royal Winchester and they did know about Hap Fair, they didn't know the same charity ran both of them. And that seemed like a really missed opportunity to actually celebrate what the totality of the charity does. And then it became very apparent that actually nobody really knew that we also did all of this community work. And that's, again, felt like, well, hang on, that's the sort of sharp end of the charity, actually. That's the sort of charitable purpose in so many ways of this organisation. And we're not shouting about it. We're not kind of celebrating it. So, you know, that felt like a missed opportunity. So we rebranded the charity. We called it Play to the Crowd, making a very clear statement about our belief that the arts should be for everybody. And, you know, particularly in Winchester, where sometimes there's a sort of elitist sort of thing, where perhaps there's a kind of middle class kind of set of people who go to the theatre. We wanted to sort of push back against that and say, no, we need to find a way of ensuring that everyone can enjoy the power of live performance and of participation. So we've always run 7 or 8, and sometimes in the past even more, youth theatres, for example, different youth theatre groups with 150 plus young people every week meeting and being creative together. And nobody really knew about that. So it's now Playmakers Youth Theatre. We've called everything we do in participation Playmakers, as part of the brand. And we've also sort of understood that everything that platforms, either at Theatre Royal Winchester or Hap Fair, which is part of the community, should be regarded as part of the Playmakers work. So all the work we do with the university, for example, is now part of our Playmakers work. And that's about supporting emerging and training artists. That's about, giving opportunities to present on stage and in a Hap Fair, and finding ways of, micro co-commissions, for example, for graduating artists out of Winchester Uni. And it goes all the way down to literally to 5-year-olds, not only in the centre of Winchester, but in other outlying parts of the district that we run youth theatres in. And it goes all the way up to people who are nearly 100, who've participated in the last year or two, for example, in a Celebrating Age project, which is all about giving voice to older people. And actually, in a few words, the whole Playmakers agenda is about giving voice to the community. And in the future, what we want to do is be even more explicit about how our local communities are latently creative people. Everybody is creative. And we want to give a platform for that community voice to be heard through creative activity.
That's absolutely wonderful, especially the work with older people, because I think that's something that we don't tend to, as a collective sort of society, provide enough of those kinds of resources. And I think that's something that, for quite a long time now, all of us at our Bounds have found that a particularly wonderful thing, as well as all the support that's gone to emerging artists, which has helped us all out quite a lot. So it's all absolutely fantastic work. We were talking earlier about how you said the things aren't necessarily going to go back to normal, as it were, and that maybe they shouldn't. And so we were curious about what you think the sort of future of the theatre industry is going to look like sort of going forward once we're through this current moment, whenever that ending may well come. What do you sort of think the new normal, as it were, for theatre is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's crystal ball gazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I think my point about going backwards, for me, that we've been given as a society, really, as a world, a big shake through this pandemic, and we're still in the middle of being shaken hard. And I think we should try to see this as an opportunity to change gear, or to positively choose a different direction and I don't just mean that in the arts, actually. I think the climate emergency, for example, this is the moment. You know, if you're going to do something radical and different, if you're a local politician or a national politician, this is your moment to do it. And it frustrates me even now that people are just putting temporary measures in, you know, on Jury Street outside the theatre, for example, there's a temporary widened walkway. Just pedestrianise Jury Street, you know, go for it. You know, take the cars out of the city centre, you know, let creativity spill into Jury Street. You know, there are so many exciting things you could do to reinvent city centres and reinvent the high street and retail if you embrace the power of creative organisation. So that's a bit of a sideline, but it's an example of how I think we could change gear if there was enough political will. So where I can locally, I'm trying to kind of encourage people to be brave. So then when we come back to the arts, it's like, well, the model we had before didn't really work anyway. You know, touring was on its knees. You know, middle scale touring is very difficult to make work. In so many ways, there's dysfunction built into our model of arts funding. Freelancers and artists are at the bottom of the pile, where they should be at the top. Buildings, and I say that I know I'm at risk of sort of shooting myself in the head, really, because I run a building, but buildings soak up a heck of a lot of money nationally, as do what Oliver Dowden calls the crown jewels. I mean, frankly, if we were radical in the way we redistributed the resource that already goes to the arts and acknowledged that there would be some casualties as a result of that, you know, and I don't want to name specific organisations, but there are many, many millions and millions of pounds that go into quite a small number of what Oliver Dowden calls the crown jewels. Imagine if you redistributed that the power of that resource to local communities, and you placed artists in each local community for 2 years. You know, there could be a really different dynamic at play. And so that's where my sort of kind of imagination is. The reality of just jumping from now to there is, of course, much more difficult in practice. So it has to be a journey. You know, I think with the best will in the world, what I'm not saying is we sort of just put dynamite under all buildings, theatre buildings. You know, I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that theatres and institutions need to radically rethink the way they work and the way they think and the priorities they give to the work that they do. So in a way, what I would like to see coming back, and the remodeled business structure that I'm sort of developing as we move through this pandemic, is actually saying, you know, actually, we want to give playmakers a bigger focus. Now, that's hard in the short term because we're having to reduce staffing. But in the long term, and maybe it's by using freelancers much, much more, local free practitioners and makers, rather than having such a large establishment staff ourselves, which is difficult because it's core cost, which you can't then be agile about if something else happens. But working with freelancers, you can be much more agile. And I think there's a real opportunity there for us to think in a different way. And, you know, if you read some of the provocations that David Jubb, who used to run the Arts Centre, and who, funnily enough, I talked with for a short time back in the 90s in a college in Wiltshire, believe it or not. So I have a lot of time for him as a radical thinker. And also Lynn Gardner in the stage. You know, these voices are really sort of setting a future direction and challenging the institutions to try to think differently. So the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, won't it? We'll see who's prepared to be brave.
Exactly, and I'm loving all the ideas instantly. Like, having lived in Winchester and worked in Winchester, the idea of Jury Street being pedestrianised and the then possible outcomes for not only local shops, businesses, just pedestrians as a whole, like that be a whole other thing. But then that makes that whole street have so much more options. And I think from what you've been saying, it's like one of those things where it doesn't, all this bad stuff doesn't need to lead to a bad outcome in the long run. We can, at the same time, be excited to change things if given the possibility and the chance to think outside the box, you know.
And David, what I would just say about that, since we're having a conversation, is that I actually do think that it's really important that when we are in survival mode and we are out there on a survival appeal, we can actually articulate a positive vision of the future. Because otherwise, what are people paying into? What are people wanting to save? They need to understand what the possibilities are and what our sort of our long-term vision is, because then what I hope is that people who are contributing to the survival appeal are investing in something. It's not just about saving something, it's about investing in a vision. And I think that's really important, actually. And some of the larger donors and people that I've been speaking to, they need to hear that. You know, they don't just want to save something in a kind of passive or negative way. They want to see what their money is going to deliver. And we'll have to go through a lot of pain in the short term. It will be tough. It is already, and it's going to get tougher before it gets better. But you know, you have to have your eye on the goal, and you have to be able, particularly as a creative, to see through the short and the medium term and have an eye on a vision. You know, because otherwise, why are we in this business? That's what we do, isn't it? We imagine.
Exactly. And so, just as a side note of that, you were saying about freelancers and like looking towards and investing in the future and stuff. With that, with freelancers and creatives who aren't on a larger scale and aren't receiving necessarily the funding that the government will be dishing out, and they are kind of underlooked a little bit, what would your advice be, and where do you think emerging companies should be investing their time and energy into at the moment? Because it might seem obvious for, like you said, quite big buildings, not all the time, because it is still difficult, but for smaller companies and for young people trying to create work, given the current climate, they might have no idea now where to look because everything is crumbling around them. So I know it's a difficult question, but where would you see, what would the advice be for those people?
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was easy. Well, firstly, I think there is a responsibility or an obligation on organisations or institutions that do put an application into to the government's rescue package. And by the way, I'm sure you've spotted, but the Arts Council have published the guidance on how to apply for that just yesterday. It's likely that anyone who's successful, the money won't land until the 5th of October. And also, really, what that money is for in terms of organisations is managing and mitigating the risks through the winter. So, you know, for example, we're still hoping to present live performance at Christmas. If that can't happen, across the country, there are theatre buildings that are under even more duress because Christmas is such an important revenue time. But I hope, and I'm still reading the guidance from the Arts Council, but I hope that there is an expectation there that if organisations are asking for and successful in getting money, and it is aimed at organisations rather than individuals, which is a problem, there should be an obligation that those organisations are going to use some of that money to employ freelancers and employ local creatives. So that's the first thing. We have to see this as an ecology. We can't just sort of save the buildings at the expense of the creatives. Secondly, I think where it's possible, local artists or freelancers or individuals or emerging companies need to be pragmatic and try to look long-term rather than short-term. So it may very well be that we can't do what we want to do at the moment. That doesn't mean to say there won't come a time when we can. You know, it may be that we have to find other work for a while, you know, and actually in a funny sort of way, you know, my job might be at risk in the months ahead, you know, if things get worse rather than better. And I could have been one of the people at risk in my organisation. And I was looking at becoming a postman. And I'm only half joking, really, because, I think in the short term, you sometimes have to look in other places in order to find a way through it personally. But you should be planning, you should be plotting, and I think in terms of local emerging artists and companies and collectives, you should be looking locally. I think localism is going to become much more important. And you should be thinking about what difference you can make to your local community through your art. And the more that you can connect sort of and plug in to your local communities and to local priorities where you become essential as a service that helps whoever it is, local authorities or other charities to fulfill their purpose, then we need to get over ourselves in terms of acknowledging that it can't just be about the art at the moment. We've got to be a bit instrumentalist in the way we think about our practice. What difference are we going to be making to our communities that is tangible, measurable, useful, and then make art around that. That's what I would advise. For some artists, that feels like a bit of a betrayal or a sort of giving up there, but actually that's part of being pragmatic at the moment. And also connect with each other, stay strong collectively, talk to your local institutions, like us, keep in touch. So that's probably my best advice, which isn't super useful, is it?
No, that's all right. It was a very difficult question, and after this call, I'm going to be going away and plotting for the artistic revolution, so that we can all then have that in the future to look forward to. But no, that's a fantastic answer.
The other thing, David, is I think we need to think beyond sort of one night touring as well, and actually think about immersive theatre, think about technology. Think about other ways in which you can generate revenues through the work that you make, and just be quite sort of kind of creative in that way as well.
Because this lockdown has opened up so many more pathways to do theatre creatively in different sort of ways. I mean, I remember before all this was happening, me and David were talking about the possibility of doing theatre on the internet, or like through this kind of setting, and it seemed like a really novel idea. Like I was very excited about it because no one was doing it, and now like Zoom theatre is absolutely everywhere, and it is still fantastic to still see that innovation continuing even despite the current sort of difficulties that we're all experiencing.
And just going back to the sort of the high streets and how what's going to happen in the years to come around retail, for example, because there's a huge behavior change gone on around how people shop, and already high streets were challenged and people were needing to think differently about the future of high streets in towns and cities. And now I think people aren't going to just be flooding back to retail. So how can we reinvent the experience of the high street? How can we as creatives and makers and artists sort of basically take our work into the street and into shops and into the high street in order to revolutionize, to use your word, David, the way people experience their local town, because I think that can be very compelling in the years to come.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. I think we very much need to sort of look to the future of sort of how else we can do things differently. Now, to go back to the survival appeal for just a moment, of course, I'm just going to do a quick plug. Crowdfunder and the Just Giving links will be in the description. Please feel free to check them out. But of course, once people have donated, I feel like with particular causes, it's very easy to then sort of fall off in terms of support, because you're giving your money, you kind of feel like you've done everything that you can. And of course, there are some people for whom donating may be quite difficult at the moment because they're in difficult financial times, who isn't right now. So for those sort of people, how would you advise them in terms of helping out with Theatre Royal Winchester? How can they help out with the survival appeal if they can't or have already donated?
Sure. Well, here's a really good idea. So Rishi Sunak is doing this Eat Out to Help Out thing. We've opened our cafe bar a few weeks ago, partly just to show people we still exist, and the building still has life. Mondays to Wednesdays throughout August, anything you buy that isn't alcoholic from our cafe bar, you will get at half price. And we will claim the other half back from the Chancellor. So my advice is come and have a coffee and a cake, or a toasty, or a smoothie, or a shake. You get it at half price, so it's kind of cheap, pretty cheap and cheerful. And you'll be doing us a favour because we'll claim the other half back. And it's one small way we're trying to get back to trading. And all profits that we can generate from reopening the cafe bar also go towards the survival appeal. So that's one very sort of pragmatic way of doing it. And by the way, we've got this little Hat Fair inspired garden happening on Tower Street. I don't know if you've seen that yet. So green grass and red and yellow picket fencing and purple gazebos. So, pretty well coordinated colours going on there. So that's fun. So you don't even have to come inside to sit down. You can sit in the garden. And the other thing I would suggest is that, that you just stay in touch with us and amplify our message. If you can't afford to donate yourselves, of course, that's totally understandable, but just get it out amongst your, through your channels, in your social media, celebrate how important it is for you. And there will be other people in your wider network who might be able to support, particularly if they understand why it matters to you. So tell your own personal stories about why theatre matters to you. That's what I would advise. Those are the two things.
Nice. Yeah, because obviously most of it is down to financial, but it's still nice to be able to share it out and get the word out there. So backtracking a little bit and maybe on a little bit more of a somber note, but just so if anyone doesn't quite realise the scale of the situation, what are the theatre's options in a worst case scenario if you can't raise the necessary funds by September?
Well, if we don't succeed in our survival appeal, we won't take the money for a start, and essentially we will have to either go into administration or mothball the charity and make everybody redundant in order to try to weather the storm so that we could come back in 2 years or something. But that is not how we're thinking. That is what the trustees call the nuclear scenario. We do not intend to go that road. If we can get close to our 225, we have a plan, and it is a sustainable plan. And with the prospect of some government support as well, that helps to mitigate the risks in the plan. Because of course there are risks everywhere here. There's no risk-free routes through this. So even with the restructured organisation and the successful survival appeal, there are still risks in our revised business model going forward. But of course, that's where the government's rescue package for the arts could be very helpful. So, yeah, so the nuclear option is pretty terminal, but that is not how we're thinking. But you asked for the worst case scenario, and that would be it.
But of course, when we're talking about the survival appeal, it's not just about trying to prevent us from losing something, as we've been saying. It's about trying to prepare and get excited for what's going to come in the future. And with that said, is it possible for you to talk a little bit about what Theatre Royal Winchester's plans were sort of prior to lockdown, and where you would like to see the theatre go once this moment has passed and we're back into the new normal, as it were?
Yeah. Well, I think we've signalled our intention prior to lockdown through the rebrand. That there is a sort of powerful step forward we took there in terms of who we are and what we believe. What we want to do post-lockdown is accelerate that journey. So we were saying earlier, can you find an opportunity in a crisis? And for us, it will be about accelerating that progress in terms of our charitable aims. it might not be something we can do immediately, because one of the things I've committed to is as many of the performances that we had programmed in to the theatre, of all genres, I've tried where possible to reschedule and continue to commit to those artists, because it felt like the right thing to do. So there'll be a sort of strange kind of time during this first half of next year. But beyond that, what we hope to do once we start new contracts and contracting new creatives and new shows is have a slightly different model where we include a levy in the tickets that is directly for playmakers. So actually, we actually say every ticket you buy, there will be X £1 or £2 that goes directly to our local community work, and make that very public, and actually say to the visiting artists, theatre companies, dance companies, even the commercial comedians, that's the deal, folks. I'm afraid we're going to take that off the top, because we believe in our local community and we want to invest in it. If you don't like it or you can't live with it, don't come. So we're going to make that quite clear as part of the deal. And also then, what I would like to do, and this is a bit of an aspiration because it won't happen immediately because we've got lots of contracted things still in the calendar throughout next year, but I would like to have a base price, a full price for tickets, but then I'd like to have a price that is more than that. And I'd like to challenge the public who come to the theatre, if they think they can afford it, pay more. And by so doing, we promise that 30 tickets for every show we'll make available at £5. So that, I'm still working out exactly how that will work. And of course, there's a potential risk if nobody decides to pay more. It's a bit of a pay it forward scheme, really, I suppose. But that's one of the ideas that we're currently working on, to reframe how we think about coming to the theatre and actually try to galvanise our public and the better off in Winchester to contribute to the notion that everybody deserves the right to have theatrical experiences. So those are just some of the ways of reframing that we're working on. And then hopefully, be able to work much more closely with freelancers to do joint projects, partnerships, to employ them on community activity, and also we've got a vision of Hat Fair, being one of the festivals that commits more to local artists and to local creativity, and to finding commissioning opportunities for emerging outdoor artists as well. So those are some of the things we're sort of working on at the moment.
Fantastic. And that all sounds really exciting. I do like the idea of it being like a community effort, that, the pay it forward scheme with the tickets and stuff, it means that then anyone can be involved, if everyone does work together for it. And with that in mind, you're saying about helping out with artists, and that's what you kind of aim for in the future, and making it a more community feel. For those people that might not understand the artistic side of stuff, and they come just as a regular audience member, they're just watching it because they enjoy it, the entertainment of it, but they don't necessarily want to get involved. If they did do that, and they did contribute and buy a ticket or something like that, or donate even, what then could you explain to the audiences that the outcomes will be from the theatre? What will you provide the local community? It seems like an obvious one to artists, but yeah, what would you say the contribution in return would be to the local community?
Well, I think for young people, we want to provide more intensive experiences to train and to develop their skills. And then once we move sort of into emerging artists, we really want to be able to invest in co-commissioning new work. And actually, for people who might not understand, what you see on stage is just the tip of an iceberg. It's the kind of outcome that's a tiny part, if you like, of a really intensive creative process. And we would love to be able to be more involved in that creative process and to support that happening more within our local community. You know, at the moment, as a receiving house, which is where most of our work we just bring in from tours, we don't always get the chance to be part of the creative process, and we would love to. And if we can find a way of generating some resource where we can start to commit co-commissioning funds, so we have a little bit of money to partner. So maybe, David, if your company wants to make a new work and you're applying for funding from the Arts Council, you know, maybe we have a small co-commissioning pot that we can put up as partnership funding to help convince other funders that that there are people who believe in you. You know, so that sort of model, because actually there's a real danger that with this pandemic we cut off the lifeblood.
Yeah.
And actually that's in nobody's interests, because as a receiving theatre, if the lifeblood is cut off, you'll end up not getting any product, or the product won't be as exciting or interesting anymore. So it's in our interests to try to find a way to support the lifeblood upstream.
Fantastic. So we've got time to just about squeeze one more question in. So we wanted to finish off by asking, there was a recent article that drew a little bit of controversy from the Singapore Sunday Times, saying that artists are the most the artist is the most non-essential role playing, which is something I think we can all recognise is nonsense. But we're wondering if you could talk a little bit about what makes the arts and what makes artists so essential during sort of these difficult times.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, because you say, Jake, that we all agree, and that's not necessarily true, of course, because there are people out there in the public who actually don't see the point of the arts, and we have to acknowledge that. You know, we can't just live in our bubble and think, you know, everybody loves it. There are people, and in fact, in last week's Hampshire Chronicle, there was a letter that was basically saying, I don't see why anyone should support the survival appeal for the theatre. If the theatre can't sort of generate its own money, then it should just be let go. You know, what's the point? And there's actually a letter back from me in today's Chronicle, so and several other people actually. So part of my answer is in those letters from me and others. But you know, I think the point is that we have to be really careful that we don't sort of, you know, in this moment when we're talking about essential key workers, you know, we absolutely recognise the importance of the NHS and of carers and the care sector, and we don't try to create too much of a hierarchy. Not, you know, so one, we don't try to say, oh yes, we're as important as a nurse or a doctor. You know, in a sense, that's not a useful way of discussing this. There are a whole set of occupations and a whole set of expertise and disciplines that you absolutely need to have a worthwhile society. You know, and we need to think about what sort of world do we want? What sort of society do we want to live in? You know, and that's the way to think about it. Not to say you're more important than we are, or we're an artist and we should be as important as you as a nurse. It's not about that. It's about acknowledging that you need a whole range of skills and interventions in society to make it a good place to be, and artists are one of those. You know, and I think in that article you referred to, you know, it said, well, yeah, just imagine a world without Netflix, and I said, well, I can imagine a world without Netflix. It wouldn't be the end of the world, but a world without music, you know, a world where you aren't able to see another perspective writ large in front of you, to suddenly have your perspective changed and realize how another person's life is. And that can be done most powerfully through the arts. And that's so vital to us being able to live together as a society. So in that sense, you know, it's fundamental. And, you know, there was a lovely message on the crowdfunder. And sorry to keep mentioning the crowdfunder.
No, that's all right.
But there was and I'll try and remember it. It went something like this. If you have just 2 pennies left, spend one on a loaf of bread to give you life, but spend the other on a rose to give you a reason for living. And then it went on to say, play to the crowd is Winchester's Rose, which actually made me cry at the time. But that's the point, isn't it? You have to have a reason for living, and it is the arts and creativity and culture in its broadest sense that actually give you that reason for living as human beings. You know, it isn't just about surviving. It's actually about being fulfilled, and feeling that you're engaged and you are part of a community. And you know, the arts is absolutely fundamental to that, in my view. But then I'm biased, aren't I?
Well, on that lovely note, that's the end of the questions that we had. And I feel like I feel rejuvenated through those answers and that conversation. So that was very nice. But on a last note, was there anything that you wanted to ask us or to say to anyone who may be watching this, or anything else that you kind of had in your mind that you wanted to talk about?
I think you just about emptied my mind. That's it. That's everything that's in it. It's gone.
Yeah.
No, I mean, just to say once again, thank you, folks, for taking the time to do this. You know, to use this as another method of supporting us. You know, and I do want to say to the local creative community that, you know, we do want to be here for you in the future. And you know, we won't be able to do everything you would wish us to do, but we want to be in dialogue, and we want to be part of a community, not set apart in any way by our building. You know, it's very important to us that there is an open channel of communication between us as an arts charity in Winchester and you as creatives and makers. So all I would say is keep in touch, keep strong, because this is tough. And you know, we will still be there on the other side, I promise you, and we will be better.
Oh, fantastic. So, Jake, is there anything else from you at all?
No, nothing else from me. Just one last plug that the links to both the Play to the Crowd Survival Appeal and our Just Giving will be in the description below. That's crowdfunder.co.uk/play to the crowd. That is everything from me. Thank you very much for coming, Deryck. It's been absolutely wonderful speaking to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Jen. And yeah, we'll hopefully have some good news soon. But yeah, thank you very much.
Goodbye. Take care.